Welcome back to Rugby from the Stands. So, watching this game, I felt like something was a little bit off. And maybe this is just because I'm an All Blacks fan and I watch so much Super Rugby, where obviously we're used to teams trying to move the ball and keep the tempo up. But this game felt very stop start. There were so many stoppages and there was a lot of kicking. There were long periods where it felt like neither team really seemed to be building anything. Now, South Africa still won 17 points to 10, and you really can't fault them for that. Winning away against Argentina is never easy, but they didn't dominate this game the way that I expected them to. So I think it's all to do with expectations as well, because even the game between the All Blacks and the Stormers, my expectations were that the All Blacks would dominate the Stormers, and that didn't happen. And so I came away looking a bit confused. But watching the Springboks play, I don't know if you guys noticed, but they never looked completely settled. Argentina kept hanging around. They kept opening them up. And with a little bit more accuracy, I felt that Argentina could have made the ending very, very uncomfortable for the South Africans. So I wanted to look at why. What did South Africa do differently to how they normally play when it comes to dominant performances in the data set? And what did Argentina do differently that made the game so awkward for the Springboks? And with the All Blacks having to deal with this South African side, is there anything useful in here for us? First, I wanted to check whether the game was actually as slow as it felt. There were 213 rucks in the match and 81 kicks. Argentina kicked 38 times. South Africa kicked 43. Now, raw kicking totals can be a little bit misleading because one team may have far more ball. So I've normalized this to kicks per 100 rucks. And Argentina actually slightly kicked more per phase than South Africa at 38.4, and South Africa at 37.7, but they were almost identical, roughly 38 kicks for every 100 rucks or 100 phases each. This doesn't automatically mean the rugby was bad. Kicking can be attacking, it can create broken field, and it can force errors. But it does confirm the shape that we were watching. Both teams were very willing to give the ball air and play for territory rather than hold it for long stretches. And South Africa won that territory contest. They had 54% possession and 62% territory. More importantly, 70% of their possession happened in Argentina's half. Argentina had only 46% of their own possession in South Africa's territory. So if you just looked at where the match was played, you would probably think South Africa were in absolute control. Most of their ball was in the right half of the field. They were making Argentina exit, making Argentina tackle, and coming back again. That's normally where the Boks become horrible to play against. You clear under pressure, they win the next contest, their forwards get them moving, and suddenly you're defending another set piece or another maul near your own line. But the next chart is where it starts getting a bit strange. Argentina made 8 line breaks. South Africa made 4. So despite having much less territory, Argentina were actually finding more gaps in the South African defense. South Africa did reach the 22 meters more often. They made 8 entries compared with Argentina's 5. And according to Rugby Pass's entry metric, South Africa returned 2.1 points per entry, while Argentina returned 1.4. So the way that I read this chart is that Argentina were capable of hurting South Africa, but they were doing it from too far away. They could break the first line, then they had a lot of field to cover. South Africa didn't break the line as often, but they started from better positions. They entered the 22 more often and made slightly more of those visits. Then you get to the defense. And honestly, this is probably Argentina's biggest achievement in the game. They completed 188 tackles at 92%. They missed only 16 tackles. South Africa completed 157 tackles at 84% and missed 30. Now, more tackles doesn't automatically mean that they had the better defense. More often, it just means that you had less possession. But Argentina did have less ball and they carried the larger defensive workload. What impressed me was the accuracy. They made 31 more tackles than South Africa and still missed 14 fewer. They were also much cleaner with their own ruck ball. 60% of Argentina's rucks were available inside 3 seconds. South Africa were at 48%. At the slower end, only 13% of Argentina's rucks went beyond 6 seconds. South Africa were at 28%. So Argentina were tackling accurately, getting back into shape, and then when they had the ball, they were moving it before South Africa could completely reset. But this is where I need to be fair to South Africa. Argentina absolutely brought physicality to this match. The Springboks made 17 dominant tackles to Argentina's 12. They also won 5 turnovers to Argentina's 2. And the Argentina number here is really important. 12 dominant tackles was slightly above their own normal range. So they were stopping carriers accurately and landing some proper shots as well. South Africa still had the edge, but Argentina definitely made the collision contest much closer. And that's what we saw on the field. Argentina stayed in the game through tackle accuracy, movement, physical contacts, and field position management. South Africa's extra dominance was concentrated in the midfield, and we will get to that in a minute. So the question is bigger than who won the raw dominant tackle count. Argentina had to stop South Africa getting useful momentum from one phase into the next. That's exactly what the contact and ruck numbers tell us. So this is where the historical data changed how I saw the match. These are Z scores. I know that sounds a little bit technical, but all it means is that we are comparing this match with South Africa's own average levels. I looked at South Africa's stats from January 2025 up until the last Nations Championship game, and I'm looking at how differently did South Africa play in this game against Argentina versus their season averages. Right? So 0 means it's completely normal. They played the game exactly to how they normally play in their more dominant games. So 0 is normal. A score of +2 means the match was roughly 2 standard deviations above their average. -2 means it was well below. Now, South Africa won 114 rucks. That was a Z score of +2.15. They kicked 43 times. That's +2.08. 28% of their rucks took over 6 seconds, and that's a +2.12. And then look at the last number. South Africa generated only 1.43 post-contact meters per carry. Their normal level is 2.56. So that was a -2.71. So they did a huge amount of work, more rucks than they normally make, more carries, more kicks, but they were getting almost none of their usual momentum from contact. And the next ball was taking much longer to arrive. So if you picture that on the field, it is a Springbok carrier getting stopped, bodies taking a second longer to clear, the defense getting one more breath, and the next phase starting against a line that is already set. Do that often enough, and 114 rucks becomes a workload rather than a weapon. And this field map shows exactly where all that work was happening. Only 7% of South Africa's possession was in their own 22. Another 23% was in their own half outside the 22. Then you get to the Argentina half. 54% of all South African possession happened between the halfway point and the Argentina 22 meters. The average figure there is 34.4%. But inside the Argentina 22, South Africa had only 16% of their possession. Their average level there is almost 32%. That is such an important distinction. The Springboks were in Argentinian territory, but they were not consistently getting into the area where all that pressure becomes tries, mauls, 5-meter scrums and cards. Argentina were allowing them to occupy the middle part of the field, then making the next step very, very difficult for the Springboks. It must have felt exhausting for Argentina because they were constantly defending in their own half, but South Africa were also burning through phases without getting the return that they normally expect. So how were Argentina creating their own chances? A lot of it came through width and through the back three. Argentina's back three produced 6 of their 8 line breaks, but they also lost the ball 7 times. The centers lost another 3. So the back three created 6 of their 8 breaks and lost 7 turnovers. The centers lost another 3. So you can almost see the trade-off in one chart. When Argentina moved the ball beyond South Africa's heavy traffic, they found space. They got defenders turning and created broken field. But they were often doing that from deep positions. And those same wide movements exposed them to handling errors or isolated carriers and possession-ending mistakes. That strategy caused South Africa problems. But Argentina's execution prevented it from becoming a winning tactic. So Argentina had 2 scrum feeds and retained both. South Africa had 7 and retained all 7. So the official number says 100% for both teams. That makes the scrums look equal, but they were not. Early in the first half, Boan went to forced Francisco Moreno upward and won a penalty. At the 5-meter scrum before Cameron Heinekom's try, the replacement front row earned a penalty advantage and South Africa scored from the play. Then in the 67th minute, the reserve pack won another scrum penalty just inside their own half. The important bit for the All Blacks, who will be playing the Springboks in a couple of weeks, is what happens after the whistle. Against most teams, the knock-on gives away a scrum, but against South Africa, a knock-on can give away 30 or 40 meters, a line out in your own half, or potentially 3 points. Handling accuracy carries an extra cost against the Springboks. Every cheap scrum can feed one of their biggest attacking weapons. Now let's look at where each team actually used the ball by position, because this is where that 10-man feeling becomes much clearer. For Argentina, the front row and back three made 34 carries each. That is quite an unusual combination. They were using the front row to take the hard, short carries, then relying on the back three to create the damage in space. Their halfbacks supplied 116 passes and 25 kicks. South Africa put 38 carries through the back row. The front row and halfbacks made another 26 each. And look at the kicking. South African halfbacks kicked 33 times. That is 77% of all their kicks. So yes, there was plenty of back three involvement once the ball was in the air or the field opened up, but the control of the match sat heavily with the 9s and 10s. They were deciding where the next contest would happen. The line break chart backs that up as well. 9 of the match's 12 line breaks came from the back three. Argentina's back three made 6 of their 8. South Africa's made 3 of their 4. The South African forwards did not make a single recorded line break. The Argentine forwards made 2, one through the front row and one through the back row. So, although the match felt narrow and kick heavy, most of the actual damage happened when the back three finally received a broken picture. And this is why kick chase and counterattack and backfield organization is so important in games like this. The kick itself may look conservative, but one poor chase or one disconnected defender can create the biggest attacking moment of the match. South Africa's physicality was also concentrated in an interesting area. These numbers show dominant tackles by position for every 100 opposition rucks. I'm using Argentina's 99 rucks as the South African denominator and South Africa's 114 as Argentina's. The highest South African figure came from the centers at 6.06. Their back row was next at 4.04. Then the second row at 3.03. Andre Esterhuizen and Caden Moody combined for 6 dominant tackles from 19 completed tackles. That's almost 1 dominant tackle for every 3 tackles they completed. So if the All Blacks are trying to play through that midfield, they have to be incredibly accurate with their depth and their support. Slow ball means that Esterhuizen and Moody will try and stop you behind the gain line. Argentina's front row, back row, and centers were all at 2.63 dominant tackles per 100 opposition rucks. Their physicality was much more spread across the team. South Africa's extra edge came through the middle. Their centers made 6 dominant tackles, and Argentina's made 3. This turnover chart might be my favorite in the pack because you can see the risk immediately. The bars going left are turnovers won. The bars going right are possession lost. Each goal dot is a penalty conceded. For Argentina, the halfbacks won both of their turnovers, but they also lost possession twice. The back three lost it 7 times and the centers lost it 3 times. South Africa were much more balanced. Their turnover wins came through the second row, back row, and centers. Their losses were spread across the team and no unit lost more than 2. Argentina conceded 7 penalties and South Africa 8. So discipline alone didn't separate the two teams, but the location of the errors mattered more. Argentina's most dangerous attacking unit was also the unit giving the ball back most often. South Africa got less line break output from their attack, but they protected possession better. 11 turnovers lost compared with 16 is still a meaningful gap in a 7-point game. Now I want to flip this around and compare Argentina with how they normally play their games. Again, this is comparing Argentina's data from January 2025. They had 54% of their possession in their own half. Their normal level is 32.3%. That is a Z score of plus 1.9. They kicked 38 times compared with a normal 24.7. They made 188 tackles compared with 143.6. Their tackle completion rose from a normal 86% to 92%. At the same time, their territory dropped to 38%, and they made only 5 entries into the South African 22, compared with a normal 9.5. So Argentina were playing from much deeper and carrying a much larger defensive burden than normal. But what is interesting is that some of their attacking behavior did not change much. Their quick ruck rate, line break count, and passes per ruck all stayed within their normal range. They didn't create some completely new way of attacking South Africa. They kept trying to play their usual quick, wide game, but they had to do it from far worse positions and mixed in far more kicking. That's probably why the match looked both dangerous and frustrating. They could open the Boks up, but they were often still 50 meters away from scoring. And because Z scores are not opponent adjusted, because they include all the opponents they played against, I wanted to check this against the last 2 meetings between these two sides. Holding the opponent constant doesn't make the matches identical. Obviously, the venues, the selections, and game states are all different, but it does reduce the problem of comparing South Africa against completely different levels of opposition. In September 2025, South Africa produced 2.13 post-contact meters per carry against Argentina. In October, it was 2.12. In this match, it dropped to 1.43. Argentina also dropped. They went from 2.5 to 2.36 and then 1.75. So this was a low gain collision game for both teams. South Africa's drop was more unusual relative to their normal level, but Argentina were not flying through contact either. Now look at the South African ruck picture. They went from 82 rucks to 88 and then 114 in this match. Their slow rucks went from 20% down to 15 and then back up to 28%. Their share of possession inside the Argentina 22 went the other way. 31%, then 39, then only 16. And their points per entry fell from 6.1 to 3.2 to 2.1. That is the clearest summary I can find. South Africa produced more phases against the same opponent, but the ball was slower, the contact return was lower, and far less of their possession reached the 22. Argentina made South Africa work for almost everything. So, what can the All Blacks actually take from this? First, they need to stop South African carriers close to the gain line. That doesn't mean every tackle has to be a huge dominant hit. Argentina made 12 dominant tackles, but their bigger achievement was completing 92% of their tackles and limiting South Africa to 1.43 post-contact meters per carry. Second, slow South Africa's attacking ruck. And I want to be clear here, South Africa may be perfectly happy with a slow overall match. They like territory, set piece, and contestable kicks, but they don't want their own ball taking more than 6 seconds. When their attacking ruck is slow, their next carrier meets a set line and their power becomes much easier to absorb. Third, and this is a big one, keep them outside the 22. Argentina allowed plenty of possession between halfway and the 22, but South Africa had only half their usual share of possession inside the danger area. Fourth, avoid cheap scrum opportunities. One loose carry or one knock-on can become a penalty, territory, and another entry. And then the biggest one, score whenever the chances appear. Argentina scored all 10 of their points inside the first 9 minutes. They scored nothing in the remaining 71. They even had 86% possession in the final 10 minutes, and they couldn't add a single point. South Africa didn't look comfortable, but they still had 62% territory, made 8 entries to 5, lost 5 fewer turnovers, and scored more from their opportunities that they created. That is how they somehow came out of this with the win. From an All Blacks point of view, I don't think the lesson is that we have to out Springboks the Springboks. Argentina has shown that you can make the Boks very uncomfortable through accurate tackling, quick movement, and by making their attacking ruck a mess. But discomfort is not enough. You still have to protect the ball, survive the scrum, and finish your chances. And that is the part that Argentina left out. So, what did you guys see in this game? If you're a South African fan, did this feel like a poor Springbok performance? Or would you describe it as a difficult, hard-won grind away win that the Springboks managed really well? And for the All Blacks fans, which of these 5 areas worries you the most before we play them? Let me know. I'm genuinely interested to see whether the numbers match what you guys felt watching. As always, please like and subscribe. We're a small channel growing very fast, and every like, every subscription really helps us. So I'll see you in the next one.